and I look forward to your response to them and discussion with other participants. Of course, I do regret that we cannot meet in person, but that's life. That's how things are at the moment. My intention is, in fact, to offer a broader picture on political orientations of the countries of Western Balkans, in particular with a view of their foreign policies, and then with some focus on how they see alternatives and what can happen if none of these big major strategic orientations materialize. And in the second half of my presentation, I will then talk about a little bit about the idea of mutual cooperation within the so-called mini Schengen idea. But then I will leave it for the other participants to say a bit more details, I think, both on economic and trade situations. So I'm not an economist. I will talk as a political scientist specialized in international relations, especially in the Balkans, more specifically post-Yugoslav space. I will start with this rather frequently used concept of external actors in Western Balkans, which is Eurocentric, as you know. The European Union quite likes to talk about the external actors in the regions where there are no member states of the European Union, just candidates, and also, as we know, in Western Balkans, a number of states or self-declared states, in the case of Kosovo, not universally recognized, are not even in the candidate status. So the European Union warns somehow about the increasing influence of the so-called external actors, and see them in a way, maybe not as a threat, but as a kind of challengers or spoilers, as they quite like to say, especially with regard to Russia and Turkey, because they present an alternative, or maybe they distract somehow what the European Union, at least nominally, verbally, thinks is the future of the Western Balkans region. Let me just remind ourselves that the very concept of the Western Balkans is defined in relation to the membership in the European Union. The concept emerged in 1997 in particular, and it was defined as former Yugoslavia minus Slovenia plus Albania. And why it was defined as well Western Balkans as a region, as a concept, it's not only to avoid this politically problematic for some countries concept of post-Yugoslav space, but also it was defined as countries that are on their way to joining the European Union, sometimes in the future. And this is the essence of the concept. It seems to be the waiting room somehow for EU membership, which was identified as a feasible prospect, so to say, back in 2003 in a Thessaloniki meeting. However, we are now in 2020 and nearly approaching 2021. And it seems that except for Croatia, which joined the European Union in 2013, no other country has actually joined the European Union. And I would say that today, the European Union would not be able or willing to repeat that promise, that they're the one that in the same words or with the same force as they used to claim it back in 2003. So for all these countries, there is a sense that, in fact, they're waiting for a Godot somehow, that they have been for a very long time in the waiting room, and the train is not coming or is not even approaching. And which left actually all these countries, especially what we see from public opinion polls, in a limbo and in a state of uncertainty about where exactly are they going and why are they still treated as one region called the Western Balkans, when we see, for example, various rather different and often confronting political interests of particular countries of the Western Balkans. I think this situation is becoming, I would say, almost unbearable for populations in Western Balkans, not for political leaders who are still talking the talk of the 1990s and early 2000s about the EU prospects and the European Union being the only way forward and that there is no alternative to European Union. This is a talk of the 2000s or maybe 1990s in East Central Europe. But for public opinion, there is, I think, the predominant sentiment is the one that I call EU indifferentism. That is, there is no EU enthusiasm, there is no much EU skepticism, there is no much hope that things will change soon, but there is almost a cold receipt of the European proclamations. And I think we noticed this already in Croatia. Just to remind you that, in fact, when Croatia joined in 2013, prior to this, there was a referendum on whether Croatian population actually wants to join the European Union. And 58% of the people in Croatia did not vote in this referendum. And of those who voted, this is only 42% back in 2012. 2/3 voted in favor of EU membership, 1/3 voted against the EU membership. So of the total population of Croatia back in 2012, only 28% of the people actively actually voted for membership in the European Union. We see the similar lack of enthusiasm now throughout the region, although I must say also that in a political sense, especially when it comes to public opinion, the region is quite divided on the issues of EU membership. We have some segments or some nations, I think particularly here of Albanians and Bosniaks in Bosnia-Herzegovina, to a degree Montenegrins, who are very pro-EU and who are quite enthusiastic and welcome the prospect of joining the European Union. Above the average, they're actually pro-EU above the average of the pro-EU sentiments in some member states. On the other hand, of course, quite on the opposite side, especially in Serbia and among the Serbs in Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Republic of Srpska, we actually see a lot of rejection of the European Union in public opinion. And we see that recent public opinions indicate that for Serbs in particular, some other nations, in particular Russia and China, are much more popular than the European Union. This is not completely specific for the Western Balkan countries. I mean, if you look public opinion in Greece, for example, you would also see that when you ask Greeks who is the best friend of Greeks, they say it's Russia and Serbia. And who is the potentially the least favorable, I mean, to whom they have fewer or less sympathies, that would be for Germany and Turkey, although the country has been for a long time member of NATO, jointly with Germany and Turkey, and member of the European Union jointly with Germany. But there is a growing gap, I think, between political elites who are all at least nominally pro-EU and who still repeat this pro-EU narrative, and the public opinion, which is actually not very much convinced. So in this situation, which is full of uncertainties, we have increasing, I would say, industry of searching for alternatives. Just bear in mind that here we are talking of 30 years after 1990 or 1989. 1990 was much more important for Western Balkans than 1989. And it was, of course, completely opposite. It was a tragic year, including the first decade immediately after 1989. So therefore, we have the whole generation now who have been waiting for something that doesn't seem to be coming at the moment. And I think political projects, political ideas are closely linked with generations. I wonder whether, for example, a new generation can actually repeat enthusiasm that perhaps some of our generation, of my generation, maybe had once for joining the European Union and moving towards the West. Or is this energy spent completely on our generation and is not copy-pasted now for the next generation. When we say all this, we need to bear in mind, of course, that the world has changed very much from from 1990s onwards. We now see, first of all, a much bigger European Union in which there is much less enthusiasm for the enlargement and more skepticism about the enlargement. We still see the world in which there is a stigmatization in the European Union and the West in general of specific groups that live in Western Balkans. By this, I mean primarily the remaining stigmatization of Serbs and Serbia, which is continuing even after 30 years after the war of the 1990s, but also the general stigmatization of Muslim population, which then affects, of course, the view on the enlargement, because Balkans is quite often associated not only by Serbs, which is also associated with Bosniaks and Albanians, who have now recently, especially in American foreign policy narratives under Trump being moved or identified or described as Muslim nations, something that both Albanians and Bosniaks actually try to avoid, but unsuccessfully at the moment. And this is a general, I think, picture which is rather unfavorable for the continuation of this there is no alternative TINA talk somehow about the EU membership in Western Balkans. And we see as a result of that, that some countries of the European Union announced certain steps that would slow down or maybe perhaps be an obstacle to further enlargement. I mean, just remind ourselves of France, who has announced a referendum on any further enlargement. I mean, this is certainly not something that the countries of Western Balkans welcomed, because they fear that actually this referendum would be negative. It would result in a no vote. And some countries of the European Union, they also put very specific policy obstacles to further enlargement. We remember Greece, for example, that has been for almost 20 years blocking Macedonia before it changed the name through Prespa agreement to North Macedonia, but now is Bulgaria. So the EU is becoming a source of obstacles rather than a source of encouragement only. And we need to bear all this in mind. Now, what are the alternatives? First of all, let me just say that the narrative which claims that there is no alternative is actually very anti-liberal, because the essence of liberal policy is that there must be an alternative. The liberalism is based on the notion of choice and freedom to choose. And if there is no alternative, then there is no possibility of choosing. I mean, the freedom to choose is based on the presumption that there is at least one alternative. Otherwise, what would you choose between? I mean, how would you make a liberal choice if there is no alternative? So for some people in Western Balkans, this narrative of there is no alternative, there's only one road, one game in town, that's European Union, is also an infringement on freedom and on sovereignty, therefore possibility of choosing. Now, who are these other so-called external actors? Now I'm using the EU narratives. I think we see in this changing world a much stronger role than it used to be in the 1990s of China, Russia, Turkey. I think in the Western Balkan context, especially after the Washington agreements with Kosovo and Serbia, Israel too. And also some former parts of the Western Bloc, such as the US under Trump and UK, which is now not in the European Union, are now semi-external actors in Western Balkans. And they will certainly have their own national interests that might not coincide and might not support the policy objectives of the European Union itself. So we now have in Western Balkans a play of various actors, not only European Union, which hesitates to enlarge, which actually is not delivering on its promises, but it's still giving promises in interaction with these external actors. So just briefly, I will go one by one very quickly, and then we can move on. I mean, when it comes to China in the first place, what we saw is a 17+1 initiative and presence of China in economic terms in some countries, such as, for example, in Serbia, when it comes to infrastructure, some projects, especially after the pandemic crisis, in which China, first of all, was identified as the source of the problem and then as the main source of the solution, but famously by Serbian President Vucic, who said already in March this year that the European Union is a fairy tale and that actually Serbia should rely on China if they want to resolve the pandemic problem. I mean, we saw billboards with Brother Xi being identified as the main ally, and this reflected, of course, in public opinion poll in Serbia, which is now much more warm towards Chinese influence. But it also in Croatia, where China is building the Pelješac Bridge, which is of strategic importance because it links mainland Croatia with its exclave of Dubrovnik, and which introduces a degree of disagreement with Bosnia-Herzegovina. When it comes to Russia, I think the public opinion polls shows, in particular in Serbia and among Bosnian Serbs, that it has a very favorable status. I know that Dimitar Bechev is talking of weak power and of the spoiler position of Russia. Nevertheless, I think in the symbolic world and mental mapping, Russia remains an alternative for Serbia and the Serbs, and also the country or external influence that is probably most feared by the West, by European Union in particular. We will see now what happens with Biden, who has identified Russia as the main enemy. I think under Trump, it was China. And when we had last month, a visit by the Secretary of State Pompeo to Dubrovnik in Croatia, he basically, all bilateral talks he had with Croatia were more or less all about China. It was not about Bosnia, it was not about the NATO or European Union or anything like that, but preventing Chinese undesirable influence. Turkey is quite popular, as we know, although not very present in Bosnia-Herzegovina, among the Bosniaks in Bosnia-Herzegovina, who see Turkey as the natural ally somehow. And I think this 20 years of governing by President Erdogan, now just as 20 years of President Putin in Russia were seen as a successful period in which these two countries have increased their foreign policy influence, including in the Balkans. The fact that European Union is not enlarging is placing Western Balkans just near the way the European Union treats Ukraine in particular and the countries of Eastern Partnership, therefore seeing them as the now de facto multipolar space rather than unipolar under the EU or Western hegemony. So it opens up the space, although it's not been materialized as much as probably some in Western Balkans would like, neither for Russia nor for Turkey. When it comes to Israel, finally, Israel was not a big player in Western Balkan politics, but it opened the Washington agreements with Trump, opened the door for Israel to take part in the Balkan politics. And it, in a way, this agreement, in fact, Middle Easternized the Western Balkans to a degree. Whether this will continue or not under Biden, we will see. Although, in fact, I would imagine that the role of Israel might actually increase. And I think in particular, Republic of Srpska is welcoming this at the moment because it sees Israel as a counterbalance to and maybe as an ally through which they could influence American policy, but also as a counterbalance to what they described as Islamization of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Finally, the two formerly incorporated, but now somewhat semi-separated external powers that used to be firmly part of the West, and now we have some doubts about this, is the US. Had Trump won the elections, I mean, we would have probably seen a bigger gap between US and the European Union, and US is an actor on its own in the Western Balkans. Let's just remind ourselves that in the 1990s, many countries, including Croatia, for example, very heavily relied on US when they were unhappy with EU. both for not acting during the war and then for other purposes. For example, territorial reintegration of Croatia back in 1995 was fully done jointly with US, not with the EU. So I think the difference was already there for Albania and Albanians and Kosovo, and even for North Macedonia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. US is somewhat more important even than the EU, especially when the EU now a bit hesitates a little bit. And finally, there is the United Kingdom, which I think has bigger ambitions than up until now in all areas that are in Europe, but not in European Union. I would imagine that the UK would like to be a security actor and somehow a protector, if possible, very much engaged in security policies in Western Balkans, in Eastern Partnership countries, and everywhere where there is they call it, Boris Johnson calls it Europe, outside of the EU, and they claim they belong to Europe but not to EU, and they would try to forge links with similar territories, including the Western Balkans. Finally, for the end, there is also an alternative of creating their own association of countries, bringing themselves closer to each other through the mini Schengen project. Which is then an alternative to external influences in general, both of the EU and of the others. And I think this idea, however, has been, somehow lukewarm, accepted in a lukewarmly way, not very enthusiastically by some members of the countries of Western Balkans. For example, Montenegro was rather skeptical up until these elections on the idea of mini Schengen, because they believe they are front runners for EU. They should not associate themselves with Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and other countries. The same thing is with Bosnia-Herzegovina, which of course notoriously has a problem of defining its national interests due to internal differences. So that is a picture that we see, I think, at the moment, with EU still claiming they would like to enlarge, but not doing much in terms of enlargement. They still keep this policy country by country, individual approach, which I think is wrong. I think they should group these countries just like the Big Ten back in 2004, but they're not doing this. And at the same time, there is, of course, an opportunity, an increasing opportunity for other actors to play part in the politics of Western Balkans. Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Jovic, and for your report. Let me ask you a question. So, what could be the role of Israel, and what could be the interests of Israel in the Western Balkans?
Well, if you want me to respond now, I mean, yeah, okay. I think as you know, I mean, in these two letters of intention that were called agreements, but in fact were not mutually signed by Kosovo, by Pristina and Belgrade, Israel was very much included. I mean, both countries agreed, or Serbia agreed, to move its embassy to Jerusalem. And Israel then, the same is with Kosovo, so that would be a precedence. It is a clear departure from the joint European Union's policy. And the question is, why is Serbia doing this? Why has Serbia agreed to that? And I think the reason why Serbia has agreed to that is because Serbia believes that it is very good to have Israel on its own side, because by doing this, you are actually Middle Easternizes the Western Balkans. And if you Middle Easternize the Western Balkans, then you are reducing it or framing it somehow within a wider context of Muslim versus Christians in the periphery of Europe. Linking the Western Balkans with Middle East and then with the Caucasus, I think later on, is a dangerous strategy, but one in which Serbia can claim that in fact it is an ally of the West against a threat of Islamization. That is, I think, the Serbian strategy when it comes to agreeing for such a huge concession as even ignoring the fact that Israel then recognized Kosovo, which Israel refused to do up until that agreement, and also the risk of clashing with the European Union on the issue of Jerusalem. as the seat for its embassy. I think also Serbia needs a link with the US. And of course, link with Trump is link with Trump, but link with Israel secures, I think, a little bit more of continuity when it comes to a positive relationship between Serbia and the United States. So Serbia's thinking about this is that in fact, Trump may go, but Israel will not. And therefore, they are welcoming this. In particular, of course, this is welcomed by Republic of Srpska, which has developed already, not very visible, but still rather strong links with Israel in the past. This is, as I said, this is a strategy. This is then a game changer, possibly, in which everyone is getting something. I mean, Trump got some, he could claim that he has resolved the problem. Serbia gets Israel on its side, hopefully for Serbia. And Middle Easternizes actually stigmatizes the Muslims more than it stigmatizes the Serbs. And Israel is getting into the politics of Western Balkans, something that they haven't had so far.
Thank you. Thank you. And dear colleagues, if you have questions, please raise your hand or please write it in our chat. Thank you. So I see that Peter Tanev has his question. So you're welcome.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So your speech was very meaningful, very constructive. And the question is very controversial, very disputable. What do you think, just your subjective point of view, is the European joining of Bosnia-Herzegovina possible before its liberation for the international protectorate? Just please rate the prospects.
Yes. Well, I think if I were the one who creates the EU policy, which I'm not, I'm quite critical of their hesitation. I don't understand it, especially not in the lights of Ursula von der Leyen claim that actually she wants a more geopolitical union. If you want more geopolitical union, you should expand where you can and when you can. You can still expand if you want it to Western Balkans. Maybe in 10 years' time, you will not be able to expand because these countries will not be interested, or maybe there will be somebody else there who will prevent you from expanding, just as Russia showed in 2014 with Ukraine, where Russia basically said, okay, this is the border, eastern border of European Union. You will not actually enlarge to Ukraine. I mean, this is the end of your road. That is your border, So I think they should also make the case, I think, by joining Bosnia-Herzegovina, by admitting Bosnia-Herzegovina, that they care about multi-ethnic character of countries. And that actually Bosnia-Herzegovina is very much alike the European Union. I would even transfer, for example, some institutions of the European Union to Bosnia-Herzegovina, ideally to Brčko, which might be a symbol of how you could actually secure peace and some degree of ethnicity, which is the European Union's proclaimed objective. I mean, after a war, peace and multi-ethnicity stays. However, I think the European Union doesn't have courage to do that at the moment. What I envisage would happen in the next 6 months is this. I think the circle around Biden, who actually is personally also very much linked with Bosnia-Herzegovina back in the 1990s and with Kosovo in 1999. So this circle around him, and I see already some lobbying groups of Bosniaks in particular, I think, trying to push him into that direction. Well, I think they might try to enhance links between US and EU, so transatlanticism, by using certain points in Western Balkans where they can come together and make some quick success. Success number one, I think, and the priority for them would be Bulgaria, Macedonia. I think they will press very hard on Bulgaria, Biden and Merkel jointly, to lift the obstacle that Bulgaria is at the moment putting to North Macedonia. North Macedonia is an important country for NATO for a number of reasons. I'm not going to mention it. It's very much linked with Kosovo and so forth. Then they will concentrate on Kosovo, Serbia, and will let European Union to lead this. not America, Kosovo, Serbia, through Lajčák. And then third, they will focus on Bosnia, where America will lead. That's my view. And I think why I mentioned this next 6 months, because we are facing German elections in September 2021. So what is done with Merkel should be done by June 2021. If they haven't, we will see by June 2021 whether Biden is just a status quo guy or a reformer who would like to score something in Western Balkans in some of these areas. For America, priority will be this quick win in Bulgaria, Macedonia issues, starting negotiation, and then they will focus on Bosnia. For European Union, it will be Bulgaria, Macedonia first, Kosovo, Serbia second. That's how I see it. I don't know if I answered your question, but can I imagine Bosnia in European Union? I don't see there is much enthusiasm for all this. I think that is a mistake for the European Union, but it opens up a chance for the others then.
So thank you for the answer. So Peter, do you have anything more?
Yeah, thank you. I just forgot.
Thank you. And I see that Denis Nesterov has also a question. So Denis, you're welcome.
Thank you, Professor Jovic, very much. Your speech was very interesting. Can you tell me, please, more about? Can you tell us, please, more about the attitudes of the new Montenegrin government towards the international relations in the region? Is it pro self-association in the West Balkans, or is it certain to the European accession? Thank you.
Yes, expectations were that the new government will start with new foreign policy in many areas, but they quickly discouraged some of these expectations by a declaration they gave, in which they, I think immediately after the elections, in which they said that the basic elements of foreign policy when it comes to EU membership, NATO membership, and a relationship with the West will remain the same. This disappointed somehow a number of parties in the ruling coalition, especially those who are more pro-Serb, Democratic Front, for example, but that's how things are. And it was necessary in order to keep the coalition together. Just to remind ourselves, they have only one seat in parliament, majority. And a part of that coalition is also the movement URA, led by Dritana Bazovic, who does not necessarily share the pro-Serb orientation of the other partners in the coalition. So I would imagine that actually this was a concession to him and also to the West in general, because of course the West was somehow worried about the changes in Montenegro. However, what I think they will do is they will try to lead a different kind of relationship with Serbia, so less anti-Serb and more pro-Serb, to the degree to which this would not clash with EU orientation of Montenegro. It still remains, I think, their primary objective to become member of EU. They don't want to enter, Schengen so far. I think that will continue for a while, because they believe that they are front runners very close to EU membership, the next country to join the EU, and therefore they think it would be just a burden too heavy to associate with Bosnia, Kosovo, Serbia, and North Macedonia. Every country that was a front runner actually hesitated to cooperate with the others. This is the reason why I believe that a country by country approach was bad. It would have been much better if they grouped them together, because then they would orient them, all of them, towards each other, therefore for more cooperation, and rather than competition. They are now in a competition against the other. And I think so. So my guess would be they will continue with membership in the EU as a priority. They will try to lead a more friendly policy towards Serbia. And then they will see what happens. If the European Union doesn't show any enthusiasm for membership of Montenegro, they might then consider other options. But at the moment, they will certainly wait for a while. And after all, I mean, this government clearly claimed they are just an interregnum government, or the interim government for the next 200 days. So after these next elections, if and when they are, we will see more clearly the picture.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, colleagues. We have three more questions, but I think that we will discuss only two, and the third we'll discuss after all the reports. So Ilya, you're welcome.
Yes, Professor Jovic, thank you
Yes.
for your comprehensive lecture. And my question is, how do you assess the capacity of the EU integration to contribute to alleviating animosity between Balkan states and create a sense of community in the Western Balkans, bearing in mind the uneven pace of European integration? Namely, with some countries it goes much faster than with other ones, and countries all have different sorts of obstacles in the European way. Thank you.
I would say the role of the European Union is mixed in this respect. On one hand, of course, they try to introduce some encouragement, both financial and in status terms. Just bear in mind that the biggest achievement actually these countries have from EU membership is that this is the end of uncertainty for them, and they are recognized as normal. I mean, that is the kind of idea. You know, they want a recognition that they are no longer some weird states that need to be supervised, observed, and directed somehow. Once you're a member of the European Union, you feel the end of limited sovereignty is over for you. I think that's the biggest achievement they have. So in this respect, of course, introducing similar standards and similar policies make them more similar. However, at the same time, I think this policy of individual approaching the European Union is harmful because it opens space for blackmailing. That is, the country that joins first will use its status as a member of the European Union to introduce pressure on the next country. So we saw this in Slovenia. Slovenia was a member of EU before Croatia. It imposed arbitration over the Piran Bay issue against Croatia. And now Croatia is a member. Croatia uses its status to regulate electoral law in Bosnia or to pressure further Serbia and so on and so forth. And I think if this policy of country by country continues, it is even more dangerous than it was so far, because can you imagine, for example, if Bosnia gets into the European Union before Serbia? I mean, how would they agree on criteria for accepting Serbia into the European Union? I mean, Bosnia would be much more how would I say, would act individually much more than Bulgaria or Greece or Croatia and so on and so forth. And the other way around, if Serbia gets before Bosnia, I see really a problem there. And this problem is linked with the conflict of the 1990s, because what they say is a precondition for membership is that they admit their guilt for the 1990s and so on and so forth, you know. So I think the EU membership has also negative consequences, especially in the way it's been done. And in particular, I think if you promise them that they will join the EU, if you ask them to limit sovereignty in order to cooperate with the EU, sometimes very painfully, for example, through the Hague Tribunal and so on and so forth, which then none of them wanted. And at the end of or changing the name of your country, like North Macedonia, you know, they agreed on that, and yet what? Nothing. You know, and that is a huge sense of disappointment with the West. And of course, it's completely reasonable. I mean, completely reasonable. So I think the process in itself is a factor that actually doesn't necessarily always help the mutual cooperation in the region.
So thank you. And one more question, Ruslan, you're welcome.
Well, thank you for your interesting lecture. You repeatedly said that Bosnia and Herzegovina relies more on the United States, and therefore I think more on the NATO integration. And I think that we would agree that the NATO and the EU integrations are mostly intertwined. And I suppose that you have recently heard that the NATO 2030 program has been adopted. And Jens Stoltenberg, the General Secretary of the NATO, posited that NATO will intensify its engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina because because NATO is always determined to cooperate with Bosnia and Herzegovina and other countries of the Western Balkans. NATO will accelerate the reforms of the military forces of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it means that NATO is and NATO approves the aspirations of the Bosnian political circles to join eventually NATO. And I think that there are even more stakes on NATO than on integration into NATO than into the EU within Bosnia. Moreover, you know that there is a membership action plan, which Bosnia and Herzegovina joined. But there are, if you know, there are a lot of obstacles, mostly from Republic Srpska, that creates some obstacles that hampers this process of integration into NATO. And therefore, I have a question. What are your expectations of the Bosnian NATO integration?
Yeah, that's an interesting and rather complex question. I mean, first of all, under Trump, there was a big, of course, question mark over NATO in general. Now I think this is gone. Biden certainly will not weaken NATO. It might only try to consolidate it. But even under Trump, I mean, America had some success in Western Balkans. I mean, for example, not only that this North Macedonian issue, the name dispute has been resolved in his term in office. Of course, he was not very much involved in that, but I mean, this certainly happened there, and the country joined NATO, but also Montenegro joined NATO. Despite the fact that Trump himself said that the Montenegrins could start a third world war. I don't know if you remember that, but I mean, he said it, well, you know, these are wild people or something. In terms, he basically said, I don't know why we should take them in, because Americans will then have to fight for Montenegro and I don't know, whatever small countries. He even, on one occasion, he even pushed the prime minister of Montenegro away from one of these meetings. I mean, but okay, but it happened somehow under Trump as well. So NATO, as you know, I mean, has bigger problems internally. I mean, I think first of all, the biggest one is, of course, a relationship between France and Turkey. And in Turkey in general, I mean, the Turkish role in NATO in general, I think, opens up a big space. Now, when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, this is a divisive issue internally. The Republic of Srpska is not keen on supporting membership of NATO, although one of their representatives long time ago signed to this MAP, but I think they see themselves as an extension of Serbia politically. Serbia doesn't see NATO as membership in NATO as its priority. Therefore, Republic of Srpska will do everything that Bosnia, I think, does not really join NATO anytime soon. So I think there would be an internal problem. This is one of these things, I mean, you know, in foreign policy strategies that there is this quietism strategy, a strategy in which, of course, a decision on foreign policy could endanger your internal affairs and internal stability. That is one of these issues. And then the second thing is with Turkey. I mean, if you have read Ahmet Davutoglu's Strategic Depth, quite interestingly, he was not very keen on supporting Bosnia's EU membership because he saw this as linking Bosnia too much with the West. He was much more in favor of NATO. NATO is okay for as long as Turkey is in. So therefore, that's not against Turkish interests, but membership in the EU for Turkey would be more problematic. They don't have a say in membership of the EU. But if Turkey is the main advocate of Bosnia in NATO, that's not terribly good for Bosnia, right? At the moment, really, at the moment. It would have to be America, I think, and Germany jointly. So it largely depends, I think, on how big the pressure is from the West on Bosnia, and whether this Biden-Trump initiative, if there is any, is powerful enough to overcome all possible obstacles. But at the moment, I wouldn't bet on Bosnia's membership in NATO. I think the status quo for the moment, it seems to me to be more likely option. Therefore, no membership, but some closer relationship.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for your answer. And Peter, do you have a comment or a question? Just
Yeah,
brief,
so
please.
I had a comment about the issue of subsequent integration of the Bosnia to NATO, but if Dejan will be on the discussion, the question will be under the discussion appropriately. Dejan?
Yeah, okay, here I am, yes.
Okay, okay. Go ahead, guys.
Thank you very much for the excellent speech and for answer our numerous questions. I think that EU politicians should be afraid of their prospects, and nevertheless, we have to proceed. So, Prince Eugemne, you're welcome with your speech.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the first intervention, but my presentation will feel the European Union better because usually Russians sound more Serbian than Serbs, and I will sound today more pro-European than Europeans themselves because I presented the view how things are moving on in European integration so far in the Balkans from the maybe bureaucratic point of view. So based on the declarations, on the roadmaps that still exist for the Western Balkans. But before I start, I would make a few comments to the lecture and maybe answering some of the questions. I think that all the anti-European feelings, and I wouldn't call this feelings of indifference, but I would call it perplexity, which is dominated the population feeling in the Western Balkans. They are connected with internal EU turbulence on the one hand, and with the global uncertainty on the other hand. The second point is that basically all Western Balkan countries have become hostages of the geopolitical logic that external actors started to approach the region with recently. So this anti-EU feelings have demonstrated the frustration with the absence of the movement further, but still they, I think, are modified by the geopolitical and global uncertainty rather than their not satisfaction with their strategic orientation towards the EU, which I believe and I argue still exist. And the language we use is from European Union integration and enlargement policy, and the mainly framework for the regional cooperation and for the bilateral cooperation between countries and the EU still is concretely stationed and positions on the EU rails, which are defined by EU bureaucracy. And here, absolutely, I agree that from the European Union capitals, we hear not much enthusiasm about enlargement. But on the other hand, the louder voice we hear from Brussels itself, from the Commission, which is still very pro-integrational, pro-enlargement. We know that this grouping that you, Professor, were looking for, is still exist. I think that we see the concrete group which combines of Montenegro and Serbia, which are the closest to EU membership. And I think that this logic still defines the relations inside the region and of the regional countries towards the external actors. Now, let me switch to my presentation. You please tell me if you could see it.
Okay. So we can see it.
Can you see it, please?
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay, so I was asked to speak about political and economic contradictions of the Western Balkans on the way to a common market. So my presentation would be from the logic that the way to a common market is agreed and still attractive for the Western Balkan 6. I know that bad news sells better. That is why we hear a lot of negative stuff about that. But still, the recent developments, I think, brings optimism to this logic and still makes it relevant to speculate about this. So I still believe that integration and ultimate membership in the European Union remains the strategic orientation of the region. And in the aftermath of the pandemic, this way to a common market somehow becomes the tool to speed up the recovery from the aftermath of the pandemic. So through the regional integration leading to a common regional markets, inclusive based on EU rules, I think that leaders of the countries try to overcome the problems connected with the pandemic and long-lasting problems of the region itself. So this way to a common market must increase attractiveness of the region and competitiveness, but which is of utmost importance, it should facilitate everyday economic interaction inside the region. Yes, I'm very much agree with the position that external actors usually influence a lot the structuring of the Western Balkan region, its economic, its political space. And here in recent years, we have observed this influence. So without pressure from the outside, I believe the pace of regional cooperation would not proceed with the speed like we see recently. So the push from the European Union and the pressure from the United States plays its very important, maybe the most important role for the in the direction of this common market. The second observation that the regional cooperation is very much interdependent with the pace of bilateral integrational process of EU and every single Western Balkan country. When we see the EU slows down its integrational process, we can observe the regional cooperation as a compensation grows in numbers and in quantity and in quality, as with this mini Schengen agreements that we have witnessed recently. So, but, however, the integrational efforts which Western Balkan governments have been preoccupied with cannot bring quick results. And I would argue that on the level of these bilateral, multilateral agreements inside the region, as well on the level of common regional market, the main controversies and contradictions have political nature. So persistent territorial status issue, diplomatic crisis connected to different interpretation of the past. This is the logic which actually defines the pace and the speed of regional cooperation, both political and economical. And here, the most acute problem is definitely the status of Kosovo issue. Not surprisingly, that economic documents all emphasize the requirement for the final comprehensive agreement on normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina. And there has been an attempt to approach this issue, this issue from the economic angle. I mean, the Washington Treaty, which concerns the economic normalization, but I hope that we hear that from Alexander in more details. But what I may say is that economic approach can be fruitless, because in the situation when political will is lacking, so it is very difficult to stop the region from dramatic degrading into political crisis, which we observed in 2018 when Kosovo government imposed a 100% tariff on imports from Serbia and Bosnia. And it was the violation of all the obligations under Central European Free Trade Agreement, which both Kosovo and Serbia and all other countries are signatories to. And only in spring 2020, the Kosovo government lifted the tariff, which allowed for a restoration of trade. But still, the main political problem remains. Bosnia does not recognize Kosovo, and so the reciprocal with the regime remains in place, and more other pending issues still are there on the ground. For example, of diplomatic crisis, we won't go into deep history. We just must recall the news from the past week when the ambassador of Serbia was expelled from Montenegro for intervention into internal affairs after he had described the decision by Montenegrin authorities back in 1918 as a liberation for the people, and we understand that for Montenegrins it is still a controversial, a contested issue. But by the way, the reaction of Serbian authorities, which finally decided not to expel in response the Montenegrin envoy, this move constitutes ground for optimism that the tensity which we have observed between Montenegro and Serbia could be overcome under new Montenegrin government. So, however, the issue of, for example, citizenship rights and a lot of others political and territorial issues still in place. I won't specify them right now to keep the time for questions maybe. But at the same time, we see that this regional cooperation is blocked sometimes by these political contradictions. So concerning the level of EU single market, which is the aim and target proclaimed by all Western Balkan 6 so far, so the main contradiction here, I think, lies in regional discrepancy and non-compliance with EU standards, rules, and norms. So the fundamental political issues and fundamental economic issues are still drawing behind, which does not let quick process of integration into the EU single market. So unfortunately, as elsewhere in the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has plunged the whole region into a deep recession. And while the outlook remains uncertain, we still may understand that the plunge, the contract will be dramatic. The World Bank projected 4.8% decline in 2020, although it is better than the prospects for the EU in general, with their minus 8.4%. And here in this context of this pandemic interference, policy efforts in the region need to remain focused on fighting for limiting the economic damage and facilitating recovery. But I think that the fundamentals in economic relations can be addressed at this stage. So every crisis brings us to the opportunities to make the regional and cooperation with the EU more resilient. And I think that latest developments in the regional cooperation and in bilateral relations with the EU, with the new pact of investments from the EU, also bring us to this economic, more resilient structuring and institutionalized picture in the region. So what we have witnessed, first, less than a month ago, we saw a memorandum of understanding and cooperation in the fight against COVID signed between the leaders of the North Macedonia, Serbia, Albania. It covers sharing information about COVID, not requiring negative PCR tests for people entering those countries, and treatment of patients which find themselves infected in one of the others. So it is immediate response to the crisis by integrating the efforts to fight the pandemic. As well, at the same meeting, which was held online, we saw a deal, a mini Schengen deal signed between Albania, North Macedonia, and Serbia, which aims at gradual movement towards free circulation of people, goods, capitals, and services in the region. So travel with ID, so first step in this direction is to become operational already in 2021. So we understand that this mini Schengen is modeled on a passport-free zone inside the EU. And after Washington agreement of September the 4th, we can expect Kosovo to become part of this agreement. But at the same time, this is not looks very bright to me. I think that before the agreement on normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina, Kosovo is hardly to see among these mini Schengen signatories. So I would, in this slide, you see the history of this mini Schengen agreement. So this year, this idea of mini Schengen didn't come out of the blue. Even last year wasn't the first time we heard about mini Schengen. We see that from 2010, such agreements started to pop up here and there in the region to facilitate travel and trade in the region between the countries. You see that in 2010, this mini Schengen agreement was signed between Kosovo, Albania, Montenegro, and Macedonia. In 2011, it was elaborated a little bit. But as I have mentioned, these grassroots level agreements are the most politicized issues. So basically they demonstrate the level on improvements between the in relations between countries. So in the first agreements, we cannot see Serbia or Bosnia, who did not recognize Kosovo's independence. And in the recent agreements, it is hardly to imagine Kosovo without pressure from outside being part of this agreement. So, as I have already mentioned, I don't expect Kosovo to participate in this agreement before normalization of relations with Belgrade. I would like to say a few words about this name, mini Schengen. So I think that it is a little bit misleading because mini Schengen inside the EU actually implies elimination of border controls, border checks. But Balkan mini Schengen is all about facilitated terms of faster and efficient cross-border flow of people, goods, services, capital. So not elimination, but simply facilitation of the process, making it less time-consuming, less cumbersome. So this is the level of grassroots agreements between countries which are moving and evolving from year to year, I would say. But more ambitious goals of regional integration, also framed by the EU logic, we can see are set by the common regional market. When operational, it must add 6.7% growth to regional economy. So the idea has circulated since the countries signed a Central European Free Trade Agreement in 2006, created Secretariat and became signatories to Regional Cooperation Council, Chamber Investment Forum, Transport Community Treaty. So, and finally, Berlin process to maintain momentum for eventual EU membership. So the foundation of this common regional market idea was set in 2017 at Trieste Summit, when the first multi-annual plan appeared, and there was agreed to get rid of non-tariff trade barriers, harmonizing laws in order to attract more investments, to make regional compatibility higher. However, since then, since 2017, no significant progress has been made due to the political problems, political disagreements. But what we can see is that the new energy and the new impulse for this common regional market has got its manifestation during recent Berlin Process Summit on November the 10th, again, less than a month ago. And the action plan, which was agreed during this summit, and it is targeted at 4 key areas. So we can see regional trade area, we can see regional investment area, regional digital area to integrate the Western Balkans into pan-European digital market. And the fourth is regional industrial and innovation area. So we could use the bright infographics as EU knows how to do. We see these regional areas on this slide. We see them, 6 of them, but we understand that free movement of goods and services, free movement of people, free movement of capital, they constitute one regional trade area. And 3 more we can add to that: regional investment area, regional industrial and innovation area, regional digital area. So 4 all in all. And we understand that common regional market so adds to the agreements of the countries themselves, so 3 more layers. So you see that the scope of goals is much broader. We can specify what benefits it can bring. It has already brought to the countries. So maybe you will address later this side, or maybe we can come to that later. So a lot of benefits that this common regional market that EU frames as the prerogative for the entrance into EU single market can bring. So regional industrial innovation area, so it will help to boom and boost tourism and infrastructural development, which we will come to that. On this slide, I wanted to show that these goals are so multiple. Only 17 of them, the main, are so complicated that is definitely difficult for the regional authorities and for the population not to fulfill, but to understand so far. But still, a lot of European bureaucrats, as well as the new appointments in the regional governments, should deal with that and continue this integrational attempt. So, what to say about the Western Balkans Leaders Declaration on Common Regional Market that was signed at the same Sofia summit? So it reads, the Common Regional Market Agenda represents a vision of prosperity for our citizens as they seek to enjoy the same freedoms as their counterparts in the European Union, as the Western Balkans moves closer towards integration in the European Union. So what is the main aim? It is the main goal is to eventual participation in the EU single market and for citizens to enjoy the same freedoms and benefits of the single market as in the EU. So it is very interesting that the professor mentioned the percentage of those in Croatia who voted against the EU membership. But I think that this tendency was very hypocritic and cynical from the Croatians. So if they had been told that their entrance would not have happened, there would be a revolution in Croatia, because you can be perplexed, you can be frustrated with the integrational process, with some of the lagging behind of this. But if you understand that you are going to get the level of freedoms and level of economic prosperity like in the European Union, you must understand that in spite of all hardships, you still move on in the direction of the EU single market. So, but this European single market, the main contradiction here is the regional non-compliance with the EU standards, rules and norms, as I've mentioned. We understand that remarkable economic progress in the last decades and aspiration to further improvement of living standards have been made. But still significant cross-country variation on path towards full compliance with the EU requirements persist. And we know that the progress is very different on the pace of this EU market, but still the overall backdraws of the economic performance of the Western Balkan countries, I think this is the main source of perplexity and indifference among population, and the fact that it is lagging behind the enlargement process. So I picked up several parameters which will show the positioning of the Western Balkans. So for example, here we see the income conversion of Central European and Southeast European countries to the EU 15. And we can see that Western Balkans, the bright green line, much below, dramatically below, even not the EU15 countries, but other Central European Union Central European countries which became members of the European Union, such as Bulgaria, Croatia. So they are much above the Western Balkans level. So the next bar chart is the quality of our overall infrastructure. We again see that Western Balkans are lagging behind. I have chosen this slide because infrastructure got a lot of attention, not only from the EU, which stressed the importance to improve the infrastructure of the region, but from the outside actors like partners from Russia and China, because understanding that the infrastructural matters could bring more results in economic development for the Western Balkans is clear for everyone. So, and the next graph is connected with the health issues. And here again, the green bars are for Western Balkans. We see that why Western Balkan leaders so much appreciated and welcomed foreign help at the outbreak of the crisis, because we may see that if the number of hospital beds is not that bad, but the medical equipment are badly needed in the region, as well as the position of the global health security index of the Western Balkans is not that bright as well. So what would be the conclusion of this short presentation is that the goal and the aim of the participation in the European Union single market persists. It cannot disappear overnight because the bureaucratic forces have been working on that for more than 2 decades already, if we take the end of the 90s. And this EU rail track is absolutely followed by the Western Balkan authorities, and the twists and turns in the attitudes from the population, from the citizens of the country, I think is connected to a short-term period of this global and European Union turbulence. But what I would like to stress at the end of my presentation, that all these economic efforts, I think, help the main goal, the reconciliation of the countries of the region. So overcoming the trauma connected with the previous crisis, conflicts, and this economic development, which is the main objective of the EU reform so far, is to bring healthy neighborly climate of relations to the region. And in this context, I think two most important and interdependent issues, not in economic sphere, but outside it, we have witnessed, is the two interdependent process. One is the inclusion of the topic of missing persons inside the dialogue on normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. It is a very emotional topic, but it deserves attention, and addressing these deep fundamental political and psychological problems can help this healthy neighborly relations. And the second definitely is which are held in Hague by the specialist court and specialist of jurisdiction of Kosovo itself. So this address by the country to its sick past, to its misdeeds, is lays ground for optimism. And I think, as well as economic development, this psychological and political development could bring fruits in the long-term perspective. So thank you.
So thank you, Polina Sergeyevna, for quite interesting presentation. So we see that we have two different points of view, and it's quite interesting. So, dear colleagues, I think that now we'll have a pair of questions just in brief, and then we'll proceed it during the discussion, which will be after all the reports. So I think that my question will be about the prospects of this cooperation in general. So they know that the aim of this cooperation is to help to help these countries to join the European Union of these Balkan countries. But do you think that it could be a cooperation of countries who are disappointed by the prospects of that they cannot join the European Union? So what do you think?
You mean the signing of mini Schengen agreement?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, I have mentioned that this process are interdependent. The slower the progress towards the EU, maybe the greater interest to foster economic cooperation among the countries who are already on EU rails. So if they know that both of them or three of them are on the path to the European Union and they would like to share these norms and aspirations, I think that they are ready to cooperate on the regional level. So this will be my answer. I think that Montenegrin no to the participation in this agreement of mini Schengen. They explained quite pragmatically that all those issues that are not defined between Albania, Serbia, and North Macedonia, Montenegro has already closed with its neighbors. Montenegro has with a free regime with almost all the countries, and economic relation and border control is much more progressive with the neighbors than inside the three of them. So it is not the political question, I think, but economic at this stage.
So thank you for the answer. So colleagues, do we have more? So Peter, you're welcome with your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to thank you for this presentation because, by the way, my term paper, the coursework is directly related to this topic. I will write about the European integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina after the coronavirus turbulence. But still, summarizing this topic, how much the pandemic will affect the further and the subsequent integration of the Western Balkans to the EU from an economical point of view, of course?
I think that in a short-term perspective, it will have a negative effect. But in a long term, if the countries address, as the EU recommends, the fundamentals of the integration inside the region and with the European Union, that the pandemic can bring fruit in the long term, the economic and political development of the region on their way to the European Union, if you understand what I mean. It is quite paradoxical.
Yeah,
yes, so
definitely.
in terms of isolation and lockdown, we cannot at first sight expect more integrational logic, but still we see it, as well as with signed agreements and deals, and both on the rhetorical level from the EU, if we analyze their recent strategic papers and progress reports. We see that their commitment to the region has grown, I would put it like that. So they show that interdependence with Western Balkans has received such a level when the European Union cannot ignore it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Good question for the discussion. Thank you.
So I think that speaking on the Balkans, there are lots of paradoxes, especially when we speak on in the framework of their integration. So I think that we can proceed. I see that Andrei Temyashov has joined us. So Andrei, you're welcome with your report, please.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Hi, everybody. What to start with? I mean, it's very important if you talk about the Balkans to first analyze and fully understand the complexity and the general context of the situation in the region. This is really the unique part of Europe, and it is geographically and politically squeezed between the East and the West, and it's always been a busy crossroads historically. And because of that, it's been a constant point of contention among major powers. So it's nothing new that today we're also faced with the same reality. Russia, the United States, the European Union, China, other players are competing, are all interested in strengthening their political, economic, and cultural ties with the region. And this really creates a rather high and constantly growing level of competition. So secondly, the region is quite fragmented itself, and it has been in the state most of the time historically. Some countries are the EU and or NATO members, some are on the path towards the EU. In the political military terms, a couple of countries have chosen political military neutrality. So if you take also into account the deep interethnic and interreligious differences, a couple of difficult post-conflict situations in Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina, you realize that this is already a volatile mixture of issues. And of course, there is an issue internally in any state, the non-constructive relationship between the government and the opposition, the inevitable socio-economic problems, the current corona crisis, of course, not being too helpful. And really, if you take all this into account, you understand that the region is not the easiest one to operate in. And still everybody is interested, still it attracts a lot of international attention. Of course, the top priority for the region itself, ever since, I believe, the Thessaloniki summit of 2003, has been the European integration. And of course, every country is trying, some of them are already in, some are trying to get closer to the EU, and they believe it's top priority for their foreign policy. And in terms of economy, they already are very closely tied to the European Union. On the other hand, I would concur with Ms. Sokolova stance on the growing importance of the region to the EU, but still we see a definite enlargement fatigue on the part of Brussels. And really this new methodology and all the changes that have been made are just a sign of the European Union not being ready to sort of give the region a clear approximation trajectory for the EU integration. The EU is, of course, faced with the ongoing Brexit, migration crisis, and we see that a lot of barriers, both physical in terms of barbed wire on the outer borders of the EU and maybe mental in the heads of many EU officials in Brussels and political leaders in the capitals, are there. So if you speak about another major player, the United States have been very much preoccupied recently with other regions, with the Middle East, with the Pacific, and of course with its own internal problems. Now it creates a certain, I wouldn't say vacuum, but a lack of attention, which of course the EU, being the #1 player for the countries of the region themselves, is trying to fill with different formats. One of them, of course, has been mentioned, the Berlin process, started by Germany, supported by France. And this is, in a way, a way of the European Union to show this attention that remains for the region and to help the region harmonize itself with the legislation and practices of the EU, with the acquis communautaire. also in the economic field. So similar ideas, by the way, are actually aired by the countries in the region themselves. So it's not only the European Union that believes that the cohesion of the inter-regional cohesion is important, but the countries of the region themselves do the same effort. Of course, they are engaged with the Central European Free Trade Agreement. There is a Regional Cooperation Council operating from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and of course this freshly branded mini Schengen initiative, which for now includes Serbia, North Macedonia, and Albania. And BiH and Montenegro are also invited, and we'll see how it goes in the near future. But again, this is the same idea behind it, to liberalize the flow of goods, services, capital, people within the region. So in this context, which is again not the easiest one, what is the place for Russia? First and foremost, we are constantly advocating for a stronger Western Balkans. We believe that this region, if it's capable of formulating and defending its own interests, and is open for cooperation with any outer players that are reliable, that are open-minded, I think it's fully in line with our vision for the development of relations. And we believe in such a region, a strong one, we could put into life the whole multi-dimensional potential of our relationship. Now, the general approach to the Western Balkans vis-à-vis the economy is quite transparent as in all other fields. So the core principles, as we formulate them, is building equitable, mutually beneficial relations, which are based on international law, which are based on free market interests and practices. It's developing strategic partnership aimed at broadening cooperation in both traditional and new spheres. It's denying any if clause limitations, any unlawful unilateral restrictions, any politicization, which unfortunately are quite often used by the West to discourage cooperation with other players. So we are not playing against anybody, be it in the Balkans, be it in any other region. It's promoting comprehensive socially and environmentally responsible projects in energy and transport infrastructure. It's using different dialogue-stimulated stimulation mechanisms, like the bilateral intergovernmental commissions, like business councils, trade and industry chambers, inter-regional, intercommunal ties. And of course, last but not least, offering the broader market placement opportunities for the Western Balkan countries through cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union, which I think is an important part of our general program. Of course, such approach presumes, as it takes at least two to tango, that the countries of the region are open to developing economic relations with us. At least on our behalf, we firmly believe that Russia has very much to offer to the region, to which we have historically had, still have a lot of affection. And probably I try to be more concrete if I could give you an example of how this positive model of relations can work. And as I'm currently stationed in Belgrade, please allow me to give you some examples from the Russian-Serbian relations. And then in the Q&A session, if people are interested, I could answer questions on other Balkan countries. So why I believe that the Russian-Serbian relations is a good example, because really we have a lot of goodwill, not only coming from Russia, but a lot of goodwill coming from Belgrade itself. And this creates a very good climate to develop relations further on. Now, despite the Corona crisis, we hope we can still reach the last year's volume of mutual trade with Serbia at a level of about $3.5 billion. our accumulated investments in Serbia are beyond $4 billion. Serbian investments in Russia are at around 0.5 billion and growing. The key area of cooperation is and has always been energy. And the same is the case with almost any other Balkan country. This is really our trademark sign, and we actually pay a lot of attention and effort to continue to be a reliable partner to the region, to be a predictable supplier, as you know, one cannot underestimate the importance of energy, of really constant inflow of oil and gas to the stability and security of every national market. In Serbia, again, where the authorities are very much supportive of developing stronger ties with Russia, we have a lot of successful projects. Let me mention just a few. The biggest one in terms of money and importance is, of course, the Gazprom providing about 2 billion cubic meters of Russian natural gas to the Serbian market. It's not only the gas that's used in industry, it's also used for the households, and really it helps to help the environment be a bit more clean. Now, together with the supplies of gas, we are now working on enlarging the Banatski Dvor underground storage facility to help the country and the region cope with the high demand periods of gas usage. And of course, there is this big new initiative, the extension of the Turkish stream on the territory of Serbia. It's almost ready to be launched. Hope we can make this step somewhere on the brink of 2020, 2021. And this will be a huge step in providing diversification of supply routes and security, energy security, and hopefully sometime in 2021, a safe transit from Bulgaria to Hungary, given Belgrade, of course, a large regional role as a transit country. Apart from that, we have a lot of projects implemented by Gazprom Neft. It is engaged for more than 10 years in modernizing the Pančevo oil refinery. And, this refinery, I should mention, was heavily damaged during the NATO bombings of Yugoslavia in 1999. So basically, our company has restored it and made a lot of effort for it to be one of the more modern and effective refineries, not only in the Western Balkans, but in this general part of Europe, in Eastern Europe. I think we have a refinery like this also in Bulgaria, run by Lukoil, and maybe there are just a few Southern Europe in Sicily, but this one is really, really very modern. And this November, despite all the difficulties coming from the Corona crisis, the new freshly built deep refinement complex, it's an investment of about 330 million euros, was opened, and it allowed to increase the quality of fuel. It allowed to produce new materials that are in high demand, like petroleum coke, which is used for metallurgy and road construction. And of course, it's used to minimize dangerous emissions. So it's ecologically very, very helpful. Apart from that, a brand new heat and power plant is being finalized, and it's another about 180 million euros investment at the same place in Pančevo refinery in tandem with a Chinese company. And it will help provide heat and electricity not only for the refinery itself, but for the nearby towns and villages of Serbia. Of course, Gazprom Neft is also researching for oil and gas in Serbia and neighboring countries. And it has a very broad network of selling fuel through more than 400 gas stations throughout Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Apart from that, we have the Russian private company Lukoil operating with about 140 gas stations in Serbia, and it's really one of the key players creating this market competition, which is very important for any market. Apart from that, we have a major project which has been running for many years, and actually is our power machines company is closing in on this project, a complete renovation of all 6 units of Gjerdap 1 hydropower plant on Danube. And Power Machines, of course, is willing and ready to participate in other similar projects, not only in Serbia, but in the region in general. And we are working with some of our partners in this regard. Now, it's, of course, not only the energy sector is covered with our economic relationship. We have another major infrastructural project in Serbia also. It's being accomplished by the Russian Railways company. It's actually currently constructing a very important part of the Belgrade-Budapest fast train corridor. And the trains will be hopefully in less than 1 year travel through all these parts with a speed of 200 kilometers per hour. So it will be a major achievement in making, again, Serbia connected with Central Europe and with Southern Europe, and really will help to develop it in the economic sphere. Now, this traditional cooperation in infrastructure and energy creates a very strong basis and attractive basis for broadening of our cooperation into brand new territory. It's the high-tech sector. Now, we have a very interesting program and a project with the Rosatom Corporation, which together with our Serbian friends is preparing the ground for the construction of the Center for Nuclear Science and Technological Research. It will be focused on nuclear medicine or on developing the artificial intelligence. And we saw the importance earlier today that was paid by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, to the issue. So we are all excited that in Russian-Serbian relations, we also have this cutting-edge component. There are also ideas to open up the Boiling Point Common Startup Facility to closer cooperate in developing Russia's GLONASS global positioning system. We have Yandex operating in Serbia, taxi services and other online services. We have, let's say, Boss Lighting Group providing modern street lighting equipment to Serbian towns. And of course, we have Sberbank, the largest bank in Russia, operating also in Serbia through its sister company. And it's providing financial services for both the companies and the population. So the list is really very long. I just want to emphasize that if you have a friendly environment with any country, really Russia can provide a lot of positive momentum in the development of economy. Now, one more important thing before we go to the Q&A session is that our approach to the region is really very flexible, and we always stand ready to help when the help is most needed. One good illustration is the current COVID-19 crisis, when immediately after the pandemic affected Serbia for the first time, Russia sent its military medical teams to Serbia, which actually assisted a lot in Belgrade and in many other towns. They worked here for about 2 months, and really they helped in dealing with the first wave of coronavirus in April and May this year. Now, half a year later, we intensively negotiate with Belgrade on the supply of the Russian vaccine Sputnik V. And actually, the certification is already underway. And yesterday, the first 20 doses of the vaccine arrived in Belgrade. We hope that we can continue and be really among the countries that will be helping Serbia overcome this crisis, help get a vaccine as soon as possible. And in early 2021, we believe the first shipments of the vaccine will be delivered to Belgrade, aimed to help the population. So, summing up, our economic engagement in Serbia and with Serbia is really quite fruitful, and it's noted not only by us but by the Serbian leaders and the population themselves. It's fruitful for both sides. Of course, the oil and gas projects are the blood in the veins of the national market, allowing it to be one of the most successful in coping with the COVID-19 crisis. And the prospective high-tech initiatives, on the other hand, are designed to keep this, bringing new energy into our strategic partnership. And again, it's, in my opinion, a very good example on how the two countries, when they both have goodwill, can cooperate. And we have a lot of good examples, really, with the region. Previously, before coming to Belgrade, I was head of the Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina section at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. So more or less, I know what I'm talking about. And over my 5+ years in Moscow, we did with colleagues a lot of positive things bilaterally with Sarajevo, with Ljubljana, and with Zagreb. So I'm sure that my colleagues in Moscow continue in the same fashion. With that, I leave the floor to you and ready to answer any questions. Thank you.
So thank you, Andrei Ivanovich. I'm sorry. I think that I just remind that Andrei Ivanovich is Minister Counselor of the Russian Embassy in Serbia, and it was a view from the inside, and I think that that was quite interesting. So you mentioned the Serbian-Eurasian integration, and I think that it's quite interesting for us. So Professor Jovic mentioned the European integration, and Ms. Sokolova so too. But what about Serbian and Eurasian integration? Do you think is that an alternative for Serbia, or it's just one side of their foreign policy?
Thank you very much for this question. Again, as I said in my introductory remarks, we are not playing against anybody, but we believe that the let's say Eurasian Economic Union can be a very good and big new market for Serbia and countries in the region. If they can make a very good use of it, we are open for cooperation. It doesn't mean that we would like them to change the course of their foreign policy. We just believe that the countries of the region, if they see really interest and let's say even economic interest in doing some business with the Eurasian Economic Union, they should do it. They should do it. I think it's very important for any foreign policy to be multidimensional, not limited to just one vector. And I think Serbia understands it. That's why they have this agreement on free trade with the Eurasian Economic Union, which is very close to being finalized. I think it's ratified in Serbia, it's ratified in Russia, it's waiting to be ratified by some other Eurasian Economic Union members. So when it comes into force, Serbia will really get very good access to really new big markets. And I think it will be an additional important dimension for the Serbian economy to develop. And vice versa, it will be very important for the Eurasian Economic Union countries to have access to Serbia to help develop its economy. So it's a two-way street, and I think we do not deny that the European Union does a lot, but again, we believe there are options, there is room for the Eurasian Economic Union to be helpful as well.
So thank you for the answer. And we have 2 more questions. So Ilya, you're welcome.
Yes. Andrei Ivanovich, thank you for your informative lecture. And we all know that Western Balkans still remain a tinderbox of Europe, namely a hotspot of tension in Europe. And my question is, are there any prospects for greater engagement of Russia in the peaceful settlement of regional disputes, primarily the one between positive experience of settling Nagorno-Karabakh dispute by Russia? Thank you.
I think we lost part of your question.
Sorry, I have low connection. I'll switch my video off. So my question
Or
is...
just chat it. You can chat it and we can see it. Yeah, if it is possible.
Yes, I'm writing it in the
and...
chat right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, the part I understood was that whether Russia is ready to be more engaged in settling some of the regional post-conflict situation. Oh, yeah, I see now. Okay. Okay, I would definitely say that the one between Belgrade and Pristina maybe will be politically more correct, but still, thank you very much for this assessment of settling the Nagorno-Karabakh dispute. It really was painful for anyone in Russia that two friendly countries engage in battles. And really, it was very important for us and for our leadership to end this bloodshed as soon as possible. So, yeah, I believe that we did what we could in this regard. As for the conflicts in the Balkans, listen, we already are very much engaged. It's the post-conflict situation. It's both in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. And we always tend to make everybody understand that the primary goal of setting things right lies with the countries of the region themselves. So if you take Bosnia, it's up to the Bosnian and Herzegovinian politicians to sit down together and to find solutions. Otherwise, we run the risks of again, returning to point zero in the settlement when the international community was trying to run a country. It's not the way our philosophy goes. Quite on the contrary. As for Bosnia and Herzegovina, we believe that this country and its political class and its economy are ready to run on its own. We have to get rid of the Auto Protectorate, which is the office of the High Representative, with its extraordinary bond powers. And it's up to them. Of course, it requires a lot of political will. It requires to spend some political capital, but they have to do it. And we just have to be ready to support and not run the business there. So I hope you understand the difference.
Yes.
That's why our active engagement is our active engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina with the Bosnian politicians and with a country as a whole and with its two entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republika Srpska. As you probably know, BiH is heavily decentralized. So a lot of competences, especially in the economic field, lies with the entities. So you have to talk directly to the Federation and Republika Srpska on many, many issues. Now, as for Serbia and Kosovo, there is a lot of effort right now internationally. There's this, of course, the Brussels negotiation process, and they have the mandate from the General Assembly to mediate the talks. I see that there is certain problems in this track. I hope Alexander Pivovarenko will discuss it later a little bit in much more detail. But what I have to say, it's again, we need to help both sides, both Belgrade and Pristina, have a goodwill approach to the discussion and stand faithful to the agreements that have been previously reached. Now, on behalf of Belgrade, I myself have dialogue with our Serbian partners. I believe this understanding of the importance of discussion and the need to move on constructively for the sake of the future, for the sake of normalizing the relations in all regards. It exists. There is a lot of expert work made here on each and every difficult difficult block of issues that lie between the Belgrade and Pristina that form the general context of the dialogue. So you have to go step by step. Belgrade, there is a lot of expert work. In Pristina, unfortunately, there is a lot of politicizing. There is a lot of energy wasted. I understand fully that the political situation there is fragile, that the government does not have the parliamentary support, but still they need to show much more constructive approach if really they want to go on and really help build a stable and more prosperous future for their own kin. I mean, there is no other way. Otherwise, they'll be stuck in the past, relying on international help and not being self-sustained, which is the case today. So our belief is that, in both post-conflict situation, the parties of the former conflict really are ready to move the process of the settlement on their own. Of course, with friendly help and assistance from the international players, from the international community in general, but it should be friendly help, not mentorship, not dictating, and not writing and formulating the settlement ideas for the parties. So I hope it answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, and we have two more questions. So Peter, you was the first who raised your hand, and Peter, do you hear us?
Thank you. I have some kind of objections about what exactly you've said about the Bosnia, but nevertheless, it's going to be a kind of object of our further discussion. As far as I understand correctly, humanitarian aid to prevent the pandemic that was provided by Russia to the countries of the Western Balkans. So it's not a one-time action. So there are going to be any other movements on this issue, yeah?
Well, I think if, again, it takes two to tango. If we're listening very careful to what the countries of the region need, and we are trying to react whenever our help is needed. I mean, you can take, for example, the situation of the terrible floods of 2014, when really our people, our professionals helped save about several hundred human lives, both in Serbia and in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They were the first to react because we had already established at the time of the crisis the Russian-Serbian humanitarian center in Niš in South Serbia. So this is really one of the examples when we were ready to provide humanitarian aid. This COVID-19 response, again, both in Serbia and in the Republika Srpska, was really, it was based upon the request by Belgrade and by Banja Luka. And if our help is needed, we of course are ready to provide it. Unfortunately, there was one negative case when Croat leaders approached us to help in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and unfortunately it ran into some resistance from the Bosniak politicians. So we couldn't do it. We just did it in Republika Srpska. And this is really unfortunate, because I believe that in this humanitarian crisis situation, there shouldn't be any politicization. If help is needed, if people believe the help is needed, it should be provided. So this is as simple as that. So of course, I hope that there will be no more crisis situation, but we live in a difficult world. If new crisis approaches, of course, Russia will be ready to help with all it can to our partners, because we believe it's important.
So thank you very much for the answer, Andrei Ivanovich. And we have a question from Ruslan Sutotchkin. Ruslan, you're welcome.
Thank you for your interesting speech and very incredibly interesting information. So in early September, the agreement between Serbia and the USA has been signed. And that agreement concerned the Kosovo problem and other issues. How did the Russian embassy perceive this agreement, and what was the attitude of the Russian embassy in Belgrade towards this agreement? Does the Russian embassy think that due to this agreement, the USA will boost its engagement in Serbia and the settlement of Pristina-Belgrade dispute, or maybe the Russian embassy considers this agreement as one of the Trump's steps to gain popularity before the elections.
Thank you very much. We, as an embassy, we did not react to it, but our representative to the United Nations did. And in his remarks at the last UN Security Council meeting devoted to the situation in the Kosovo settlement, he said that we noted the agreement. If a major international player is interested in settling certain conflict situation, it's always welcome. There are some non-regional elements to the agreement, as you probably know, if you have read it, that raised a lot of eyebrows, not only in Russia, but in the European Union and in the Middle East. So we'll see to which extent it really is implementable. But, you know, it remains to be seen how the transitional team and whatever comes after the American elections will be ready to engage with the region. We saw some inputs, as you know, testing the water from some think tanks recently, some people talking about EU Yugoslavia and this kind of stuff. So we'll see. I think the important thing is that there is, as I said in my remarks, that the region attracts attention. We believe this attention should be constructive, should be based on the international law, and should not cross the red lines of interference into internal affairs of any state, which very is important, I think. The region is quite capable of running the business by itself, and every country of the region also. Thanks.
So thank you, and thank you for your answers. I think that it's quite important that our country does in the Western Balkans and in the Balkans itself. So it's also the goal of our club. We also want to make relations between our countries better and better. So nevertheless, we have to proceed, and I see that Alexander Pivovarenko is also here. Alexander Alexandrovich, please, you're welcome with your report on Serbian-Kosovar conflict. So I yield the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Although my topic is very concrete, I see it also is a very debatable, like every topic which is subject to dogmatic interpretations. And also, as Mr. Jovic said in the beginning, that we all live in a very changeable circumstances which are full of uncertainties. And to multiply these uncertainties, let me start with 3 questions to an auditory. So you might answer it just using your voice. So I have 3 questions, and I will accept 2 or 3 answers on every question, just to save our time and to save time to my further presentation. So please be short and follow the idiom that punctuality is the politeness of kings. So the question number 1, how do you characterize the development of the Kosovo issue 20 years? Do we see any progress, or an issue is stagnating or moving as spirals? So the floor is yours.
So
to everyone who wants to contribute and to give his answer.
Yes, of course. So who has an answer? So I'll begin.
Progress,
so
definitely.
So
Progress,
Alexander, you're welcome.
Progress.
I think,
so any other opinions?
I think that no, because we see that there is no progress, and Washington Agreement has shown us that there is no progress in Kosovo problem, because Serbia has to have relations with Pristina, but it's not their willing, I think, in this case, in this way.
I think that Biden may change its foreign policy towards the Western Balkans, and therefore there will no progress.
But we can also say that it's moving on the spirals, because we saw progress, now we see kind of change, and it's uncertainty. So let me thank you for your opinion. So let me write it as a 3rd opinion. Yes, like moving on the spirals. But of course, I agree that stagnation also. We can also put it in a box with stagnation. So question number 2 to all of you. Does Alexander Vucic want to recognize Kosovo? So to make it more concrete, does he really have a desire to do it, or he is just wearing a liberal tunic while still remains as a hardliner nationalist like he was in the late of the 1990s?
I think that Alexander Vucic has his point of view on this very issue, but I think that I hope that when he will visit our university, we will ask him this question. And I think, but personally, I think that he doesn't want, because he is Serbian president at first, and they think that it's their territory, of course.
I think that won't recognize Kosovo because it defies the resolution 1244. So it would be against the international law. Therefore, it is impossible.
Well, I have quite another perspective. What we are talking about is politics, domestic politics. And the point is that the moment when any Serbian government decides to recognize Kosovo means it's political death, because in no way will. So it's it's probably the most difficult issue of Serbian politics, because speaking about the Western orientation of Serbia, it would be conducive for Serbia to recognize Kosovo's independence for the sake of its Western integration. But at the same time, public opinion is strongly against it. It opposes such a step. So any government that recognizes Kosovo will be ousted. So I think that Vučić is not likely to recognize its independence.
Moreover, the Serbian presidential election is looming, and certainly, so as not to lose its popularity within the Serbian population, it won't do such severe actions.
I think he's running in circles, or possibly in spirals, with this question, trying never to be in a position to absolutely have to answer it. And I think he's doing this quite well so far. I think he will not really make any decisive move. And that's why I see, for example, that he needs new elections rather soon, because now he cannot actually explain why he can't resolve Kosovan problem when he has no opposition in parliament. But I think he will not. He will try to escape it and will not recognize it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that we do not have a kind of division over this question. So we conclude that Alexander Vučić doesn't want to recognize Kosovo, and because of idealism, because of political pragmatism, because it means political death for him if he makes this. Of course, if it means political death for him and for his ruling party. The question number 3, what is an approach or a strategy of Albania towards Serbian-Kosovo issue? So let me point out that Albania, as a sovereign country with the capital of Tirana, not Greater Albania, but as an individual state actor. So what is the strategy of Albania to this matter?
I think that Albania knows that it's quite an urgent Serbian problem, and they try to influence on Serbian politics and on European politics, politicians with the help of this very instrument, with the help of Kosovo problem.
Got it. Thank you.
I think Albania would like to see 2 Albanian states rather than 1, if possible, which is also what Serbia would like to see with Republic of Srpska, or maybe Montenegro, which is less likely. But I think if there is a bit more imagination in resolving the Kosovan problem, I think both sides, Tirana and Belgrade, should probably move towards talking to each other and avoiding Kosovo as a subject. I think they should desubjectivize Kosovo in a similar way in which Dayton desubjectivized Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats. The agreement over Dayton wouldn't be impossible if they were not excluded from the agreement, because they both opposed, in fact, Bosnian Croats and especially Bosnian Serbs opposed Dayton. So I think the solution would be much easier to find for Kosovo had it been between Albania and Serbia. Now, I had some hopes that this might happen with Rama and Vučić, but I don't think they will go far enough, actually, in this.
I think that after this brilliant answer from Professor Jovic, I have to wrap up my presentation, because my main point would be exactly the same. But although I still have time, so thank you. I think here we'll close our Q&A session, like the first part of it. So let me proceed to the main thesis, which has already been mentioned and characterized by Mr. Jovic. Now, before this, let me say that, of course, we see a lot of interpretations of current state of affairs between Serbia and Kosovo, between Serbia and Albania. And of course, there could be more of them. And all of these interpretations are attached to recent developments in international relations, of political statements by leaders or by incidents. And of course, every development produces more and more interpretations and speculations. And as an example, if we look at Serbian media, we can see that an idea that Alexander Vučić is going to recognize Kosovo, it appears at regular intervals 2-3 times a year. So literally before every time when Alexander Vučić moves to Paris or Berlin to an international summit, there is always appears someone who says that the time has come and Vučić will betray Kosovo tomorrow. On the other hand, we also see that when this summit comes to an end, nothing happens. Yes, when we speak about the straight diplomatic recognition. Yes, and Serbia still didn't recognize Kosovo. To get out of this mist of uncertainty, I think we need to find a more stable interpretation on what is going on in Belgrade-Pristina relations. And in order to do this, we have to use, I think, structuralist approach. We have to look at economic connections. We have to look at trends in infrastructure, which is on the agenda right now. And only after that, we have to look at statements and political events. We also should use neo-realist methodology, which says that the main priority for state is survival. The second priority is an increasing of wealth, and all these goals should be achieved preferably without war. And of course, we have to look at the Serbian and Albanian part of region on the whole. So to look at everything that goes on southern and southern-western, it's on southern and southwestern bordership of Serbia. And taking this in mind, we may find that the question number 3, the question of Albanian approach, is not an idle question. So what can we see? Serbia. Serbia right now is a world leader in greenfield direct investment. This is a very important important thing, because greenfield investment it reflects not only financial flows, but creating real working places. Serbia is not a poor and isolated country anymore. Is not a devastated country like it was in 1990s. Serbia definitely has resources to modernize. Big projects are being carried on. We have we see significant capital inflows. For example, right now we see an increasing airport Nikola Tesla in Belgrade. They are building a new terminal, and the old terminal has been renovated recently. So right now they are constructing a new one, and this is a big project. It costs money. And Serbia right now has a strength to make these kind of projects. But of course, the main project is Corridor 10, a big transit route which has motorway and railway, as Mr. Temyashov pointed out, which goes to from Budapest through Belgrade to Thessaloniki, and one of its lines lies to the southwest to Montenegro, and which is also important to an Albanian coast. What can we find in Albania? Albania is a country with a stable economic growth, or at least it doesn't have collapses regarding like the economic crisis and the crisis of 2012. If we look at the prognosis of World Bank towards Albania, which could be found at the site of the World Bank, we can see that the estimations are very optimistic. Speaking of investment, I can't say that we can find big investments in Albania, especially at such scale as we see it in Serbia. Nevertheless, big projects in Albania also are being launched. For example, Ericsson company is making a 5G infrastructure on a motorway Tirana-Pristina. Company Ericsson also has won a big contract on modernization of local IT communications in Albania. By the way, it's very interesting because in Serbia we see very strong positions of Chinese Huawei, while in Albania we see strong positions of Ericsson, a European company. So it's an interesting 5G issue, and which leads us to the question of standards, which is also becoming a political issue regarding the US position on Huawei in Serbia or in Europe on the whole. We also have to look what's going on in the port infrastructure in Albania. The main port of Albania, Durrës, increased its cargo capacity on 15% in 2019. Of course, 2020 will bring a decline, but maybe this decline also increases motivation of Albania to restore those achievements that have been achieved 2 years ago, and to do some concrete constructive steps. We also see signs of renovation in other port cities like Vlora, like Saranda. We see that European companies are coming to this parts of Albania, not only Italian companies, because Italy has always been a main investor and the main big player who is interested in Albanian coast, but we see also some companies from Central Europe right there. So Albania is also becoming attractive, but the number is still small. Speaking of transit routes, we can say that position of Albania is dubious. Because on the one hand, we see a preparation for renovation corridor 8, a transit route, a motorway which will start in Durrës in Albania, which will come through Macedonia to the Bulgarian port of Varna. So literally, it will connect Adriatic coast, the Black Sea coast. We also see that the Trans-Adriatic pipeline is about to start, and this is a Trans-Adriatic pipeline. Is a big Italian-Turkish gas transit route, which is almost completed. And after Azerbaijan won a war in Karabakh, it has an increased opportunities to supply gas using this transit route. On the other hand, Tirana is separated from Corridor 10, a big route that goes through Serbia. And it is separated not structurally, but mainly politically, because the province of Kosovo lies right in the middle between Serbia and Albania. So if we assume that Albania wants to be included in the main transit route, which is coming from Serbia from north to south, and we have a right to assume this because if Albania is interested in further investment flows or is interested to become more attractive for bigger investment, we may find that Albania has a reason interest to find a way to reach Serbia and to solve the matter in a constructive and pragmatic way. What's about Serbia again? An imperative of foreign policy of Serbia, since Serbia emerged in the political map as a principality in the 19th century and after that as a state, the main imperative for Serbia was to find a stable way to the sea. And since Croatian option has been always limited in 19th century because of the Austro-Hungarian presence very strong, in today because Serbia is not part of the EU, and Serbo-Croat relations still have remnants of what has happened in the 1990s. We see that Serbia has only two viable options, such as Montenegro and Albania. And of course, Thessaloniki, but this is part of Greece. So, relying on this rationalist aspiration, and let me assume that both Serbia and Albania have a desire to establish pragmatic, constructive relations, which could be of mutual benefit for them. By the way, it's interesting to note that if we look at the project of a Balkan Schengen, we may find that Serbia and Albania are the father founders of this new regional format, while Kosovo is still not a member of it. Meanwhile, Kosovo lies in the very center of this Serbia-Albanian configuration, and of course, Kosovo issue has to be solved to make both these things, I mean, transit routes from Serbia to Albania and the Balkan Schengen format as a whole, so to make this format alive. That's why Kosovo issue has to be solved in one or another way. So how it could be solved? Washington Agreement, signed in the early September, shows that funding solution is generally possible. It also shows that to find this solution, Serbia doesn't need straight to make a straight diplomatic recognition. This diplomatic recognition can be easily used as a concession. So in this typical negotiations logic, when both sides, when you make negotiations, you always in the beginning state some conditions that might be unacceptable for your partner, and then you may give him some concessions, and then finally you come to a kind of solution, and you promote your own interests. If we look on how Washington Agreement was signed and how the process of negotiations has carrying on, we may see that this kind of logic, this kind of technique was used by Donald Trump. Nevertheless, of course, now in the US we have a new office, and Donald Trump is not in the White House anymore, and we may assume that this Washington Agreement will not survive this significant change, which of course leaves the main question open. Nevertheless, it doesn't change the main imperative of relations in this triangle. I mean, Belgrade, Tirana, and Pristina. And this imperative is, as far as I believe, that Belgrade and Tirana, they frankly desire to make cooperation, to become closer to one to another. At the same time, both of them have red lines, and of course, Belgrade has its own red line. And what is interesting is that Pristina, which is maybe the weakest part of this triangle, it has a good understanding of these red lines, and this understanding might help Pristina not to melt into this Belgrade-Tirana cooperation. So not to melt into, but to preserve its own subjectivity in this triangle. So, speaking it simply, Kosovo has a potential to spoil these relations between Belgrade and Tirana. I will conclude here and ready to answer your questions.
Thank you for the speech, Alexander Alexandrovich. So, I can start, and my colleagues will proceed. So my question is about Serbian-Kosovar relations. You asked the question that about Vucic's thoughts on this very issue. I think that Kosovo will not only the spoiler of this relation. I think that Kosovo is a spoiler of Serbian integration, EU, of the Serbian EU integration. What do you think? Could Serbia be integrated into the European Union without recognition, of Kosovo, or not?
I think that the answer is clear, because the EU approach to the Serbia-Kosovo issue is very normative, and after the changes in the White House in Washington have become evident, EU has got more argument to promote this approach. Yes, and to get back to its position like it was in somewhere in 2010, for example. I will add more. I think that a normative politics, a normative approach by the EU is a nice tool to freeze the regional integration on the whole. I mean, in the whole countries of Balkan 6. So in case of Serbia, it's a Kosovo issue. In case of Macedonia, it's a question of name. Yeah, we can also, so Albanian aspirations are always being vetoed by someone in major, by the side of one major EU country like Netherlands, for example. So you can also find a way to stop these aspirations and not to allow the new countries to enter the main European Union. So it's a very nice and very optional tool to make a regional policy.
So thank you for the answer. And
Sorry, Sergey. So I have just a comment to your question. Firstly, it's very clear because according to European Union law system, no country can join the EU if there are any issues of territorial claims. That's why it's just obvious that that answer is no.
Can I just say something in a comment? I mean, since Cyprus joined the European Union, I think the European Union might actually have a case in which they might allow another country to join the European Union without resolving its problem of its integration. But instead of saying, well, we agreed on Cyprus and it didn't sink the union, so why don't we just do the same thing with some other countries? They're actually claiming the other way around. And this is, we don't want another Cyprus, which I think is not very helpful. But I mean, Cyprus is less integrated than Serbia. And it's also certainly less integrated than Bosnia-Herzegovina. I mean, absolutely. But I think along the lines of what Alexander said, I mean, I wrote a paper, it was an essay, in fact, in 2008, just after the unilateral declaration of independence, in which I was speculating, knowingly that it wouldn't lead anywhere, actually, but I was speculating with this, what next? And I think the problem for Serbia is Kosovo, it's not Albania. And it's actually, existence of Kosovo is bigger problem, I think, than to have a bigger Albania territorially, if you know what I mean. The existence of Kosovo is humiliation, and unacceptable. Whereas, for example, changing of the shape of countries that are recognized is a different issue. It's a different issue. The second thing there is that if we have enough imagination, we may imagine a situation in which there is more than one Kosovo, in which Serbia can claim that it has Kosovo, and Albania can also claim that it has Kosovo. And that both countries or leadership, for their own domestic purposes, could in fact use the concept of Kosovo being part of Serbia, that is, and Albania as well, if there is a political will for that. Let me just remind us that, in fact, Kosovo is not only a problem for Serbia, it is actually a huge problem for Europe and to a degree also for NATO, both of which, in fact, are quite divided over the issue of Kosovo. I mean, the fact that it is now, 20 more years since 1999 and 12 years since 2008, the United States have actually not succeeded in securing Kosovo as status of a state in full capacity. So it's been a bit of a spectacular failure, I would say, of the United States of America, actually, on the Kosovan issue. Unlike in Bosnia, but in Kosovan issue, they still have five allies in EU and 4 in NATO, I think, or if I'm not mistaken, who are not recognizing it. And with this derecognition process in Serbia, which has been stopped with Washington agreements, but probably temporarily, if the Washington agreement fails and derecognition will continue, there is now, of course, fewer number of countries that recognize Kosovo than they used to be before. And I think to complete with this, I think this deserves a huge debate and probably in a closed circle. And I'm all for it, about the options that are available or might become available in the future. With two points. Now, one is that in Serbian politics, I saw some people who were flirting with this idea, with the idea of dividing Kosovo. Ivica Dačić, for example, a couple of, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, and then he withdrew publicly from that position. I wouldn't use the concept of dividing and changing of the borders. I think what we could use in diplomatic terms, if we have imagination and will, is the IMEMO agreement between Yugoslavia and Italy, where after 30 years of no solution, de facto solution, which is not being recognized as de jure, we had in 1974 or 5 IMEMO agreement, 30 years after the Second World War, in which there was no changing of the borders, but turning the de facto border into the jure border. I think that formulation might be useful in thinking about what really happens in Kosovo, because when you say changing of the borders, everyone says no, but here we wouldn't have a change of the border. We would probably have turning the de facto situation, which is of American doing, in fact, right, de facto situation on the ground, into something that is being recognized as the jure, just like we did have with Zone A and Zone B in Istria. Between Yugoslavia and Italy. Now, okay, now I'm going probably too far for this debate, but I very much welcome, for example, what Alexander said, and this kind of thinking out of box somehow, at least in closed circles. And since we have no political influence except for a gentleman from the embassy, I mean, we can say whatever we want, I suppose.
So thank you for the answer. And we have one more question.
Yes, I hope this time you hear me well. Alexander, thank you for your interesting lecture. I'd like to clarify for myself the essence of the relations between Albania and Kosovo. What I've heard is that on the political level, the relations are quite constructive. Namely, Kosovo is to a great extent Albania's idea and part of Albania's ideology, that it is a part where Albanians have always lived, and that it should be united with Albania. That's how Albanian official political stance says. But at the same time, what I know is that ordinary people of Albania, they don't have a feeling of unity. They don't feel that Kosovars are the same Albanians as they are, and that in general the attitude of Albanians towards Kosovars is skeptical, at least. And what can you say about the real essence of relations between Albania and Kosovo on all levels? Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting question. Because I haven't mentioned in detail my presentation, while it is also important. It is important because I think all of us, I mean, at least in Russia, we are, I think, under this pressure of narrative which comes from narrative of Greater Albania. Yes, which sometimes damage our vision or too pragmatic aspirations of and actors that are present in the Balkan region. What can we find if we look there from a pragmatic point of view? Of course, we can find Albanian nationalism. We can find, I would say that it is an active phase, simply because Albanian national movement started later than, for example, Serbian national movement started. Yes, Albanian national movement is the second part of the 20th century. Nevertheless, if we look simply on the map, yes, we may find that Albanians has almost achieved their national aspirations and the main goal for them not further expansion but consolidation of what they have, and they basically do that if we look again at these infrastructure projects, because they are they have a trans-border nature. Yes, we have, and the Albanian part of Macedonia is getting closer to the main Albania, I would say. Albania and Kosovo, yes, and Albania and Serbia. Interesting thing is that if we look at Kosovo political system right now, yeah, we can find that the opposition, which in 2020 has finally had an opportunity to get into office, is more nationalist and more fundamentalist than the leaders of the previous generations, like Hashim Tachi, who in last few years has been the main promoter of pragmatic solution between Belgrade and Pristina. And I think that this ultra fundamentalism, which is now strong in Kosovo, may become a problem for Tirana, because it could also limit Tirana aspirations to cool down relations with Belgrade.
Okay, thank you.
Question. You're welcome.
Well, regardless of the common opinion that that Biden's foreign policy would differ from Trump's attitude, foreign policy attitude towards Balkan and the other regions, there is an assumption that their foreign policies, I mean Biden's and Trump policies, would overlap. So this their initiatives, Trump's initiatives on other regions, especially in the Middle East and in the Balkans, would remain and would be implemented by Biden's administration, and those experts that who argue this way, they prove their opinion, substantiate their opinion with the facts that Trump maintained those sanctions against Republic of Srpska, against Milorad Dodik. Under Trump's administration, 2 countries were accepted into NATO. Moreover, Trump deepened cooperation with Greece to stabilize the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, to control Turkey. Moreover, Trump's administration also stood for the initiative of 3 Seas, which was initiated by before Trump's administration came to power in the USA. So, and it means that the U.S. foreign policy won't change, and those problems, the settlement of those problems, the way how the USA approaches to solve these problems would remain even under Biden's administration and future administrations.
Mm-hmm. This question is also very topical because I think it depends not only on Joe Biden as himself, but also on who will take the foreign office and on more structural and complicated things. And it's also, I think for me, it's open what's going to happen there. Next, what I can say that the Washington Agreement was a very interesting and very creative, again, and very potentially breakthrough solution for solution of Serbia-Kosovo issue. And if we look at the text of the agreement, we may find that it doesn't include only Serbia and Kosovo. In the text of the agreement, there are also North Macedonia mentioned, and Albania is also mentioned. And I would also say that for Serbia, this agreement was of benefit. Serbia really have, not completely, of course, but some points there were really for Belgrade advance. And very interesting that it was that the side who find itself defeated after these Washington negotiations was Kosovo side, and the prime minister who signed there, he was under serious critics of his fundamentalist opposition. So what I'm saying that after these major changes that we see in the US, something may change. For example, at least Albanians do believe that these changes may happen, and that's why Albanian diaspora in US supported Democrats. So I don't know about the US regional approach of the whole, whether it will change or not, but let me say that Washington Agreement may change, and the US position may become more normative and less pragmatic, like it was in September 2020.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You are all questions. And remember that Peter had one question to Professor Jovic. Oh, Peter, you're welcome. Peter, we had to So I remember that it was about Bosnia Herzegovina and NATO and the possibility of its integration. So what do you think? It's a question, I think, to all the speakers. Is it possible, and which way?
I think it's not a significant question, because we already have NATO present in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and this is it.
So you think that they don't have a goal to integrate NATO?
I think that the goal may exist, but it's not the most important question on the agenda right now.
I have a comment about this kind of theme, and it was the thing that I wanted to say in the previous hour discussion. It was the question of the same question was by the Ruslan, as I remember. So in August, I completed an internship at the EU for Althea mission. Maybe someone of you knows about. So it's Althea mission. It was established by the Dayton's agreement. And to tell you the truth, what exactly I can tell, there is no point in discussing of the topic of the subsequent integration of Bosnia to NATO. So because this joint mission actually governs the country, which is much more than the usual NATO membership. So in other words, NATO does not benefit from Bosnia's regular membership and its alliance. So
yeah, very nice point. Thank you.
So does anybody has?
If I may add, can you hear me? Something is wrong with my internet connection, but if you can hear me, I may comment on that.
Oh, we can.
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the NATO issue for Bosnia has been the most annoying and disturbing for the country the recent years, because you know that the government could not be formed for more than a year. And this very NATO issue was the main stumbling stone, because the geopolitical situation in the region and the NATO enforcement its logic collided in Bosnia and Herzegovina with Russian support for Bosnia Republika Srpska position that it cannot afford NATO integration. So I don't see that NATO integration of Bosnia is possible. I think that together with Serbia, this republic, this country will remain neutral as long as Republika Srpska is inside the country. And I think that, as I have already mentioned, that this country has become the hostage of the geopolitical rivalry in the region. Because you mentioned, Peter, the Althea mission. And at first, when it was transformed from NATO mission into EU mission, it was absolutely welcomed by Russian part of the international mechanism that is present on the ground. But for 3 consequent years now, Russia has remained neutral on the agreement in the Security Council of the prolonging of the mission's operational opportunities, because every single resolution mentions NATO integration, Bosnian integration into NATO, which Russia cannot accept at this geopolitical circumstances now. And so I think that the NATO issue for Bosnia is very disturbing, annoying, and very destructive. So if the contradictory logic between Russia and the West persists, I think that the NATO question will be very depressive for Bosnia as a state unified, because it is one of the most important stumble stones between Republika Srpska and the Federation so far.
Well, thank you.
If I may add a couple of words, listen, it's not about Russia's position. I would disagree would argue with Polina Sokolova, because it's not about Russia's position or Russia's insistence on something. It's about a clear view by the Bosnian Serb leadership and by the Bosnian Serb electorate in general, which do not agree to full NATO membership for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the country is constituted in a way that requires a consensus within the presidency between among the 3 members of the presidency on any foreign policy issue. So you have to have a Bosniak member of the president, a Croat member of the president, and a Serb all agree on a certain issue. So in this reality right now, the constitutional structure of the country is actually built in a way that does not, I don't see a situation when the Serbs would agree to a thing like that. This is about Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's about building compromise. It's about working in small steps. Start with some small things. But it's painstaking, it's difficult, but they need to do it by themselves and not say that, well, the US wants Bosnia in NATO, Russia wants or believes that Russia wants Bosnia out of NATO. No, it's about the Bosnians themselves. This is my idea. This is my point. It's a sovereign country. It needs to be run on its own and not rely on any outside influence or outside views to solve any of their problems. This is the most important thing. And better, it's not NATO running Bosnia. There are two segments to the international presence in Bosnia. You were on internship there. So there is a civil presence by the Office of the High Representative that deals with civil aspects of the settlement and is helped by the Peace Implementation Council and its steering board. Now, strong international oversight. Now, there is a military part of it, and it's the EU Althea mission, which evolutioned from NATO IFOR mission, and is actually backed by, every year its mandate is backed by a Security Council resolution. Now, we've been abstaining for some years. Before we had a really good draft, thanks for the German colleagues last year. So really, this mandate of Althea mission is not about advocating the foreign policy choices of Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's about providing additional security. And I think in the military aspect, the international presence is very much evolved from the interfering part of the story into the assisting part of the story. So in terms, I actually served in Sarajevo for 4 years, so I know what I'm talking about. And this EU4 mission is very compact in size. It's about 600 personnel, and they are distributed into teams all over the territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they really provide assistance, guarding the ammunition sites and providing control there, assisting Bosnia and Herzegovina in building its security capacities and so on. This is fine. I mean, what we object to is the civil part of the settlement, the role that the Office of the High Representative plays there. Because, when you have a High Representative who has an extrajudicial power of ousting any official or imposing a law, it's not normal for a country that, by the way, more than 10 years ago was a member of, non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. So it's kind of, sounds very strange to in current situation in Europe that a country is really under the international protectorate. This is an important part of the story. So we want as much international presence as assistance, and of course local ownership. And local ownership, by the way, is a strategy that is approved by the international community in general, by the Peace Implementation Council for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Peter, you have something? Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just meant that there is no any sense for the subsequent integration of the country if we have a kind of mission like that of course make an assistance to the country from the security point of view.
Oh, are there any more questions to our speakers, or some topics to discuss? I think that all our planned topics were covered. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the discussion. The Balkan Club hopes that in the future there will be even more such like events, and I think that it was quite interesting for all of us to discuss all these topics and to listen to these reports. So thank you for the discussion. Be careful, and goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
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 Thank you, colleagues. Goodbye.
До видения.
До видения.
До видения.
Hvala vi.
Thank you. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.